All right, guys, in today's video, we're going to be working on this 1999 Chevrolet Suburban LT four-wheel drive with the 6.5-liter diesel option. And what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be swapping out the injection pump on this 6.5-liter diesel engine. This one's been in here a long time. This one's been in here since it was replaced under GM warranty back in the extended warranty days, back in 2009. The longevity on this I would attribute to this product here that the owner's been using very religiously ever since it was recommended by the dealer way back then. Stanadyne is the OEM manufacturer of the injection pump that we're going to be replacing today, and this is a diesel fuel additive that helps with lubricity on ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel and gives these pumps as much life as you can get out of them. But let's go ahead and get started by checking out the service manual and see what we're in for with this procedure today. All right, guys, if you remember from the diagnosis video, this particular truck is a 1999. It's a Suburban, though, so it's still the old body style, the GM 400. So we're going to be using this version of the 99 service manual that's specific for that body style. If we take a look at the service manual and go over what the fuel injection pump replacement entails, there's a special tool that's going to be needed to remove the 3 nuts that attach this pump to the engine, right? There's a slot size one here. This is facing the front. It's like a fancy S wrench. I'll show you that when we get to it. I'm not going to be using this J41089. I'm going to be using an aftermarket one, and there's several different aftermarket versions of this. I'll put those links in the video description. What I'm going to show today is going to cover all the model years that are in the video title for both GMC and Chevrolet, as well as Hummer H1s. Now, you're going to have to go through and disconnect the negative battery terminal, remove the intake manifold, and this is both the upper and the lower. We're going to need to take the hard lines off between the pump and the injectors. We're going to need to disconnect the rubber fuel inlet line that's coming from the fuel filter manager to the pump. And then we're going to have to get all the wiring harness routing out of the way so that we can get this out. We're going to pull the fuel return line. It's also a rubber line that's coming from the pump. Then we're going to go in the front and pull the oil filler tube where you add your engine oil and the grommet for that as well. That's going to give us access to the bolts that are attaching this to the timing mechanism. So we're going to rotate the engine to get access to those bolts, get those out of there. After we get those out of there, we're ready to remove this. Now, they put an important note here about at this point, when you start getting to step 9, don't touch the starter. Don't use the starter in any way to turn the engine. Severe internal engine damage can occur. So at this point, you can't start it anymore until you put it all back together. Take those nuts off. That's where they talk about this special S wrench. Pull the pump out. Cap off all the lines and nozzles. This is an important point that probably should have got the same kind of important highlight they had here, in my opinion. Any debris that gets into these mechanical injectors is going to foul them up, and you're going to end up having to do the job again. So it's very important everything stays surgical room clean as we do this procedure. There's a gasket on the flange here between these 3 studs that this pump sits on. We'll have to replace that gasket, and then everything is reversed on the installation. They mentioned putting the new gasket on there. There's a locating stud. I'll show you some other pictures of that we've got to get back into the piece that we, on the driven gear, that we removed the 3 bolts from. That's got to be in exactly the same position as the old pump when we pulled it out. I'll show you all that as well. This is just another view. This is, a very rough drawing. We'll show some actual views of this. And then they tell you those 3 nuts are going to get to 30 foot-pounds. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get a torque wrench in on all those places given the special tools that are involved, but we'll get all the ones we can. When we put the drive gear bolts back in, they're going to go to 18 foot-pounds. We're going to end up reversing everything we took apart and putting all that back together. There are some torque values on these lines, both to the pump and to the the injectors themselves. I'll cover that as well. That's in another section. They don't put it here because they talk about it in this section. And then there's going to be a timing step that we're going to need to do, which is over here, and for that we're going to need a Tech 2 tool to do this timing. We can dial it in pretty close mechanically, and I'll show you that as we do this procedure, but at the end we're going to go ahead and run this to dial it in the rest of the way. This other book I've got here to show you some other information. This is just a training manual from GM back in the day. I picked this up, I think, at a swap meet many years ago. but it comes in handy for stuff like this. And this is just an overview of the pump itself. It's kind of like a view of what we're going to actually be pulling out. There's nothing serviceable on this other than the FSD, or sometimes called a pump mounted driver, or PMD, when it's in the stock position on the side, and the engine shutoff, or ESO solenoid. The rest of this is really not user serviceable. Yeah, you could maybe change the optical sensor, but there's some adjustments and timings that are required to get that right, so it's really beyond most shops' ability to tackle that. It's really just a thru, a field replaceable unit. You just replace the whole thing other than the ESO or the FSD. There's some other blow-ups here. This is just another like blow-up of that same picture. And here is more detailed of a drawing, just showing the same pump that we're going to be working on and the different parts of it. But this whole piece is just going to come out as a unit, complete with all the wiring over to the FSD. Let's see what else is in here. I think there's a picture. It might even help us understand how this failed. This is just some of the internal operation. There's an example injector with the return back to the tank. Here's the ESO here. Here's the fuel filter manager. There's the lift pump that's sitting on the frame rail. So basically the fuel gets brought in from the tank through the filter, comes into this side here. It's going to come over to this transfer pump, and you can just see this is all very high level, right? They're oversimplifying this, but it's just to kind of give you an idea of what happens internally. So this transfer pump is one of the ways how the IP pump can keep pulling fuel even when the lift pump dies, as long as it doesn't lose prime. This other picture over here is just kind of giving you the next phase of that and how the fuel routes as it continues through the internal structure. And so when we get down in here, there's some moving parts here. This plunger here, there's I believe there's an accumulator here, and I thought I saw something else. This regulator here, this charge valve here. Any of these parts that are moving are subject to wear, and any of those parts that wear then would be subject to being thermally changed as the engine heats up. So getting back to the first video where we kind of diagnosed at a certain temperature we start losing fuel pressure, and so the engine stalls out and dies. Somewhere in this zone here we've gotten over wearing, or just normal wearing, but it's gotten over specification, and now we're no longer able to maintain the flow of fuel. And then this last picture here is just talking about how the fuel is metered internally. And then this is another view of that metering operation. And again, any of these steps could be our source for the wear. This gets into a little bit of the timing with the stepper motor. The stepper motor was shown over in this picture here. It's sitting here right on the side, on the passenger side. And they're showing you just how that operation works. I'm just kind of just showing you this just in case it's of use to you or a reference to you. And this is a view of the timing circuit of the pump and how fuel is happening there. And then over here we can see how fuel is used to lubricate these wear pieces that I was mentioning earlier. The diesel fuel is the lubricant for inside the injection pump. Anyway, that's enough on the theory and the academics. Let's go ahead and get started on the disassembly. All right, we're going to start with disconnecting the negative terminal on both batteries, right? Since the diesel engine, we've got two, so we'll do the one over here on the driver's first. Now we're going to move over to the passenger side. All right, so we got the driver's side battery disconnected, right? You can still see our hood lights functional, right? So the test to make sure you've got this de-energized, and I'm going to make sure you also take this negative terminal off the battery over on this side. And now the hood light's out, so now we know we've got everything de-energized. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to pull this engine cover off. There's 4 10mm bolts securing that. We're going to pull those, and then it just lifts right off. The bolts are captive, so they'll stay with the cover. All right, get those guys loosened up. Might be a couple of threads still holding over here. Now we can get the cover out of the way. All right, next up is this upper intake manifold crossover. So we've got a couple of sensor connectors to gently work off. This one, and you guys can't see it, but I'll show it to you when I get it off. This one here, okay? Then we've got these 6 10mm bolts that we've got to pull out. Next up, we've got these two 13s, because this brace that secures these two pieces together, we've got to get this to let go so we can remove this. And then we've got this 8mm on this clamp. So let's go after these two guys next. Let's switch out our socket for a 13 and an 8. So we'll do this 8 first. Just want to get this guy so he's loose. All right. Now we're going to need our 13. All right, so this guy here. And this guy here we're just going to loosen. So we can do that. And we'll put this here so we don't lose it. So there's an RTV sealant between this tube and this aluminum crossover. Normally you got to break that seal with like a radiator hose type of tool like this. As long as this clamp is loose like this, the only thing holding it is going to be the RTV sealant. And you can use a tool like this to break that seal. But there's no... Wasn't expecting this to be holding on at all. It's probably just one spot somewhere. Yeah, there it is. I just heard something pop loose. That was probably it right there. This is what you have to do to get her to come off. Let's see if we got it where she'll twist now. Oh, she's still bound up on something. I've got her clamp is completely loose, so that's not anything that's holding us on. There we go. Looks like right there had some re-adhesion right there on the top edge. All right, once you get the RTV to let go, this comes out. As you see, there's a gasket in here as well, so take note of that. The first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to cover this up so we don't get any debris that falls inside there. All right, let's get this gasket off of here. We've plugged up the turbo outlet here, and so the next thing we got to do is we got to get the lower intake manifold off next. So here's the injection pump right here, and then our lines to the fuel injectors. You guys can see them down here, referencing that picture, right? You can just barely see them right down there, right? You can't get access to them without removing this guy. So the next thing we're going to do is we've got some debris here. Looks like we've had some kind of rodents chilling out in the back here. I see a couple of crunched up seeds. We need to get in here and blow all of this out so that when we pull this manifold, this crap doesn't fall down into the engine. So we're going to get some a hose over here, some compressed air. We're going to blow all this out, and while we're at it, we'll go ahead and blow out all 8 injector areas just in case there's some dirt sitting around there as well. So let me go do that, and then once we blow it out, then we're just going to start taking stuff out of the way. Now we're going to leave the AC here. We're not going to have to touch the cooling line. I mean, this radiator hose is kind of in the way, but we're just going to work with it because we don't want to disassemble too much here. I think we'll be fine with these cooling lines over here. I mean, they're not ideal, but we'll just try to work with that as well. So what we'll do is we'll disconnect the fuel filter manager from those two 15s in the back, and then we'll just work our way up both sides with the 15 millimeters that are holding this guy to the block. All right, so in order to see what we have to blow out of the way and get the most clearance, we had to kind of take the top cover off. So we're going to use a couple of really heavy pieces of wood and a paper towel to make sure now this crap gets blown back into the intake. Now we're just going to go do that cleaning step I mentioned. Once we do that cleaning step, then we'll be able to start disassembling this upper piece. Alright, so I'm just going to keep cleaning all this out. I'm going to have to get in front of the camera to get some of this really well, but you guys get the idea. We're just going to try to blow all the debris out of this valley where we're going to end up pulling this intake out of. Alright, next book. We've got all that blown out. This is what we already did, the upper intake manifold. The only reason I'm showing this again is you may have a non-turbocharged engine, and you're still going to have the fuel injectors, but you're going to have this EGR valve. So just pointing out that's another piece that's on there that stays on. You're just going to remove it the same way that we just showed, but it's going to look a little different. So that's one thing I wanted to show. Something else I wanted to show is on the lower. On the lower, they got a procedure here where they talk about what they want you to do, starting with removing the upper. They want you to take the fuel filter off first, and then the glow plug relay. Then they want you, if you have the non-turbo, they want you to take the EGR boost solenoid bracket off. Then they want you to remove the heater hose and bracket from the cylinder head. Now, I'm going to try and skip that step. We'll see how that goes, just so we don't want to mess around with it. Remove the heater hose and bracket if it has rear heats. This Suburban has that. But again, I'm going to see if I can skip removing the hose. I'm just going to pull the bracket. We'll see if we can get this to fold out of the way. There's some ground straps in several places. These are the ones in the lower, in the rear, when you're facing the front of the vehicle, passenger side. Now, you got to be careful in these, especially with corrosion. You can't use power tools, because what will happen is these nuts will often grab these wires and spin the whole stud out, and then you'll rip the wires. What you have to do in these kind of situations is you're going to have to get a wrench to hold the stud while you take the nut off separately. So just watch out for that. The only ones you can power out are the ones that don't have any kind of wires attached to them. This is just straight up taking the bolts off. The only other thing that's worth showing here is I like this diagram here where they number these. In fact, you got to come up with some way to organize these. They're different lengths. Some are studs with nuts, some are straight up bolts, some are studs without nuts. I use a bunch of Ziploc bags, and I number them this way, and this way we can make sure each bolt goes back the way the factory intended it. All right, guys, a topside creeper is going to be real handy for this job. If not, your back's going to be in for a treat. I'm going to go ahead and not narrate as we pull these. I'm going to pull them in the order that we saw them numbered in the service manual, and I'll show you different tools as we go. Just take note of the tools I'm using to get each one. Because we've left this radiator hose in, we're going to have some clearance problems. We're going to use some 3/8 hardware, and other places we'll use 1/2-inch hardware. The other thing I got here, tennis ball on the hood latch, real handy. Ask me why I know. But, you know, past experience, you jump up on these things that can help prevent you from getting your scalp hit. All right, so we're going to dive into it. We're going to do the driver's side first, all the way back, and then we're going to come down the passenger side. All right, at this point we've got all the bolts out that are holding the lower intake. Now we've got some brackets like this one, the one on the other side, this vacuum line to the wastegate solenoid. We got to get some of this stuff out of the way. These ground lines, this was, I disconnected this early on when we weren't narrating. This is the remote PMD harness. Got to get that out of the way. We want to clear all these connections that are going to need to be unplugged in order to lift this out. And we're going to get the fuel filter manager tucked back out of the way as well. So I'm going to spend some time to kind of get all this stuff out of the way, and then we'll get a pry bar and we'll start to lift this intake out. All right, so what we've done is we've taken, we can get this stuff out of the way now because we're about to pull this off. Couldn't get a bungee in here, but we just took some string to keep all of these wiring harnesses kind of grouped up like this. One gotcha you got to watch out for is right down here, this particular bolt. There's a tab. If we zoom in, this tab is holding the hard line for the fuel return. So it's not going to rotate or anything. We're going to have to slide the intake back out of it without bending it up, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And the side here, we've got this glow plug wire harness that's running. We've kind of positioned it up out of the way so we can kind of scoot the intake up out this way. And we've got the fuel filter manager pushed off of these two bosses. That should allow it to clear that. You don't really have anything to worry about on this side. So I'm going to go around now, and I'm just going to get a pry bar, and we're going to try to break the adhesion. I'll start on the driver's side here. There's a couple of places where you can fit one in. If you see right like that. All right, so we're just trying to kind of make sure she's going to let go like that. That's also given us a reassurance that we did get all the fasteners out of the way. Now, one thing I'm noticing as we do this side here, we've got this gasket in the way. We got to get it to kind of separate like that and keep the gasket down so it doesn't pull up against these lines. And just a little bit of a twist with the pry bar and we can take care of that. All right. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and then we're going to position the camera and we'll lift it off. All right, we cleared that little return hose brace in the front. We've cleared the fuel filter manager. And we're working on this glow plug harness and this big harness in the back. It'll be fun getting this back in here, I tell you. Stuck on something. It's not a fastener. It's not a wiring harness. I'm guessing it's this bundle of harness in the back here. It's got to be this stuff. Yeah, this is it. I don't know if we're going to be able to film all this, folks, because I need to get back there and see a little better what's blocking this. can only feel so much. Yep, no, I'm going to have to get right here. You guys aren't going to be able to watch this part. We're going to get this cleared of whatever it's binding up on here, and that should allow us to get it out. All right, there's no way around it. I really didn't want to deal with coolant on this job, but we're going to have to get this upper radiator hose out of the way. We just don't have the clearance to get the manifold out with this in place. Should be enough to get it past, and then we'll go ahead and get the tool we used before. Now I got to worry about coolant running into this intake because of this. Go ahead and break the seal. Oops. Yep. Move this into a different position. Let's see. So we're probably going to have the coolant from the thermostat. There shouldn't be anything actually in the hose. There might be. But before I pull this, I looked at it very carefully, and at least on the Suburban, we just don't have any clearance to go back any further with this huge bundle of wiring harnesses that are back here. We just can't push this any further back to get this thing to come up. And even if we could, we were trying to avoid pulling all these coolant hoses off. And we can't, if we're going to end up pulling that, we're going to have a coolant problem anyway. So if I can just get this out of the way, then we might be able to clear it up here in the front. That's the thought. All right, guys, I'm just slowly trying to work the coolant that's inside this housing into these rags. Really don't feel like draining the whole thing, right? Just for this one little problem. You guys can see it glugging out over here, hopefully. Right there. So just going to do a little bit of that, change the rag, do a little bit more, and then we'll be able to pull this hose off. All right, we got bored of this and just drained the coolant from below. So we're probably going to have a little bit left in the hose here that we just don't want to run down. We have some rags here to catch that. I'm going to get this hose up and out of the way, and we'll see if this got us the clearance we need to get this intake out of here. All right, that did help us get this out of the front now. Kind of hitting the air conditioning sensor now here. This Suburban just has so much stuff packed in here. Yeah. Guys, I might have to take the air conditioning compressor off. That looks like that's going to be necessary as well. We just can't clear this guy with that in the way. Unfortunately, there's no way out of it. We need to clear between this pressure switch and this line. I was thinking maybe I could shift it a little bit to this side and go under it. Let's try that first. Run this glow plug harness underneath. Get it out of the picture. Maybe clear these coolant lines. Nope, we're going to have to take the air conditioning compressor off. Jesus. All right, let's get looks like a 13. We'll have to pull these 4 bolts so that we can lift this up enough to get this out of here. All right, guys, to get the belt off the AC compressor, just mirror here, I'll show you on the belt tensioner. There's a little 3/8" socket piece, or drive piece rather, molded into this belt tensioner. We're going to put our breaker bar in there, and we're going to push down on it to get this to release so that we don't damage the resonator. We'll come at it from this side. We'll push down on it with our left hand, and we'll reach over here with our right hand and work it off of the, whoops, bumps you guys, work it off of the alternator. I'm going to have to block your view for just a moment here. Come on. There we go. All right, slowly let that tension back up, and then we'll be able to get it off the AC compressor. This is a pisser because we just changed this compressor a little while ago. Now we're taking it back off again. We will not lose any refrigerant, though, because we're just going to remove those 4 bolts from the bracket so we can lift it up. I already broke the torque. Kind of got caught in our cap there. All right, so the idea here is, without putting any tension on these hoses, and we're going to have to kind of get rid of our wire support here, we're going to want to lift up on the compressor. Make sure we get all these out. Set these aside. All right, so yeah, you don't want to lift up on the lines. And this particular type of compressor, this is like a Harrison HT6. It's 2-piece, so you don't want to get any torsion or flex on it, or it'll start leaking. That's just kind of like what they do. But we can pick it up like this. I feel like we can bunge it out of the way. We're going to need to pull this nut here, which we're going to have to do anyway because we have to take this resonator off and pull the stud off, which is holding these 2 lines. And that'll let us pick the compressor up enough to get this intake out of here finally. All right, we'll put the nut back on the stud. We'll bag this for later. So now this whole thing is free. We'll figure out how we're going to get it positioned up and out of the way, and then we'll come back and pull this intake out. All right, guys, I'm just going to hold it up out of the way for a little bit. See if I can maneuver this thing out of here. Finally. There we go. Set this back down where it was. This secure so it doesn't roll off. Sure we're not pinching the harness. All right. Now what we need to do is we need to plug up these holes in these ports before any crap falls into them, get these old gaskets out of here. All right, this is what it looks like inside, and then here finally are the hard lines coming out of the fuel injection pump going to each of the injectors. So now we've got easy access to remove those without bending the lines. It's really important not to bend the lines when you're removing that, whether you're just going to change the injector or whether you're changing the pump. Either way, you want to keep those lines nice and straight. They're all pre-bent by the factory for certain angles. All right, so now we still have some more stuff to take off on the passenger side. So what we're going to start doing now is we're going to get the air box off and we're going to get this ducting off. This ducting is pretty simple. There's some band clamps on either end of this. So we're just going to take a flathead screwdriver and release the band clamp here. And we're going to release the one at the turbo. This resonator has got a crimp clamp on it, so you can't take that off. And we already took the nut that holds it over here because we had to get that stud out so that we could have moved the air compressor, the AC compressor, so we could have got the lower intake out in the first place. And then we've got this kind of elbow here that's super leaky with oil. This will be a chance to try and investigate what's going on with that too. See if we can take the lower clamp off first. Eventually we'll need to get all of it out, but we'll start with this. Actually, I don't think that clamp even is even letting go. We're actually pulling the whole fitting piece out. All right, let's try this end. There, that off. We'll figure that piece out later. Now with that clamp off, we got this. And then we should be able to get this off and out of here. So now that piece is off. Now to get the air box off, there's two 13mm bolts that come up from the fender well. We'll open this up, and be careful with these. Sometimes the plastic's gone and these little stainless clasps can just drop out on you. This one's still in good condition. Just going to open this up. Looks like it's time for a new air filter too. Take this out, and then we can see where that 13mm is popping up there. We'll go ahead and PB blaster that down, and then I'll show you guys on the other side. We'll pull this out. That'll allow us to move this box. All right, so this is that 13mm bolt that's holding the air box on, and there's the alignment tab. Come up here with a breaker bar so we can crack the torque on this rusty guy. There he went. I don't know, it might be too much rust for the electric ratchet. Let's give it a shot. All right, guys, this is what that bolt looks like that we took off from the bottom. Now, the box is held onto this kind of bracket that's sitting into the fender by this little Christmas tree clip, and then the fender piece is got some kind of springy prongs on either side. See if we can raise the camera up and get our hands in here to give it a squeeze. There we go. These two prongs here are what you're trying to get to let go of the fender. And now the box is out of the way. I can see there's some more rodent activity up here that we need to vacuum out. All right, next thing we're going to take off is this upper control arm dust shield to give us access to come in to where the injector lines are. So if yours is missing, I'll put a link in the video description for the part number for this, but there's just some Christmas tree clips. We just want to gently prise these out. Two more. One more. You want to get it out without tearing it or breaking anything. There we go. Set this out of the way. Now with this guy cleared out of the way here, you can actually see all your glow plugs nice and easy here. All right. All right, the passenger side is the most cramped, but we can see right here for the number 2 cylinder, there's one of the injectors, right? And there's the 19mm fitting that holds the hard line onto the fuel injector. This is one of the return hoses, and this is the other return hose right here. So this piece here, this exhaust shield, is blocking our access. Now, 15 years ago, if you back up the camera, I would say just remove the whole turbo. That was 15 years ago, and there's a lot more corrosion on these trucks now. and there's a lot more chance to break something, and almost everything's discontinued and the parts are unobtainium. You can't even find these 6.5s in the salvage yard very easily anymore. So I'm going to try to avoid that. I think what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and take that shield right here, this heat shield. That is held in by these two small, looks like maybe 7mm bolts. One there. Right in the back there. Get some light for you. Get in there. That guy in the very back corner. And then this guy right here. All right, so those two bolts go into a bracket that holds this heat shield. And then the bottom of that bracket, I don't know if you can see it from where you are, but if we come in from here, come in from up top here, this little brace that comes off the bottom of the bracket that I'm tapping on right here, that holds the bottom of this heat shield. It's like a foot that fits into it. So I'm hoping if we can just take those two 7s off, we can kind of cock this around and pull it out. And if we can do that, you can tell from the view you see of the number 2 injector, and we'll be able to have access to loosen up these lines. So let's give that a shot. If we bomb out, then we'll have to roll the dice on removing the turbo, and hopefully nothing breaks. All right, guys, we're going to go in here and go after these 7mm on the heat shield now. I'm going to have to block your view to get at them. This guy we should be able to get just with a straight 7mm. At least I think it's a 7mm. Yeah. All right. Now we'll switch to ratchet wrench from our breaker bar. Let's see if we can get it off. I was worried about these breaking. I just was hoping that the heat shield doesn't get as hot as the turbo itself. Yeah, this guy's coming out just fine. I'm not going to take him all the way out because I'm afraid I'll drop him. Now this one, I can't get a straight shot at for the angle. Probably have to come in here with a wobble. And then we'll be able to see if we can manipulate the shield. If we just pan the camera back over here, I'll show you guys, the concern I have with trying to remove this. If we take a look at the downpipe here, the turbo, you can see these bolts are just rust welded together. And I'm just concerned if we try to take the turbo off, those bolts are going to shear off. And then we're going to have a bigger job than we already have. So that's where we're going to go this route first. All right, guys, the access for this one, I come in here with a 1/4-inch ratchet with a small 7mm socket on the end. And there's just enough room to slide it in from the front here. So you can see I got my hand right under the turbo, and I'm just reaching in and getting that fastener off. You don't have a lot of clearance in terms of arc to swing, so it's going to take a little while to work it off, but it does work, and it does have the right access so that you can get a good bite on this. This little bolt has a very shallow head, and you just can't get a grip on it with a wobbly, so this is the only way I believe she's going to come off with what we're going to try here. Now, we've already been burned once trying to take a shortcut with the upper radiator hose, but we'll try again here and see how we luck out. All right, guys, we're going to have to pull that turbo. The service manual is not going to be much help to us. They don't really give you a whole lot of information. They tell you to remove the CDR valve and vent hose. They tell you to remove the grommet from the rocker. You probably can leave that on there. They tell you to pull the feed hose off. You really just need to disconnect it from on top. And then they tell you to remove the upper return pipe retaining bolts. There's a couple of 10mm on here that hold this pipe that runs down the side. They tell you to remove the assembly retaining nuts. There's 4 nuts on 4 studs they want you to remove. These are the ones that are really rusty, why we were trying to avoid doing this. And then you'll be able to remove this. What they don't tell you is there's a band clamp here in the back that has to come off as well. A vacuum line on this wastegate actuator that's got to be disconnected. And then there's a 10mm bolt that's holding this number 3 part that you can't see in the picture has got a bracket way over here. And they're not telling you they also have to disconnect that as well. So there's a little bit more than they go over, but let's go ahead and get into it. All right, that shield isn't coming out, guys, so we're going to have to go ahead and go for the turbo here. There's 4 studs that hold it to the top of the exhaust manifold, and then there's nuts on the bottom. You can see right there. And I've already doused them with the chemicals. This is my go-to chemical for these kind of problems, AC Delco exhaust rust penetrant. This works pretty good on manifold bolts and that sort of thing. We'll give it a shot on this problem. We also have this band clamp back here, and we've given it a shot on this as well. That's an 11 millimeter nut that holds the band clamp. These 4 nuts on these studs are 15s. There's 2 10 millimeters. You can see the top of it right here. These are bolts that hold the turbo oil drain, and then it's a 19 millimeter fitting on the oil inlet. So we got to take all of that off, plus this vacuum hose. So we're going to go after the hard part first, which would be the 15 millimeter rusty nuts. Now something else with these is just the shape of this cast iron fitting down here. You can't get a 1/2 inch impact socket to fit, so we're going to have to go 3/8, but I don't think there's going to be enough oomph on that if we have to go that route, so we're using going to use a neck down and a swivel to get it to 1/2. But what I'm going to try first is to do it manually, just to try to avoid shearing off the stud from corrosion, if that's going to be a problem. So I'll show you the first one. Hopefully it goes all right. I'm just going to come in from the bottom here. That's why we took that cover off, so we can do things like this. Get this on here, and then we'll see if we can get this to release just with that. Now be careful of this air conditioning line. I want to get this position where I'm not putting any stress on that on my first pull. And we'll see if we can get this guy to let up. I'm using a 1/2 inch breaker bar here. Yeah, no, that ain't happening. All right. Next thing we're going to try is some heat. I really don't want to use an impact wrench, so we're going to try to heat up the nut, and then we'll try this again. All right, you can use an acetylene torch or MAP gas with propane, or excuse me, with oxygen, or you could use a bolt buster. And I'm going to use a bolt buster. It's all electric. Just uses induction to heat things up. Going to heat this guy up. We've got our socket set up right here so we can get it on there as quickly as we can. So it heats it up pretty quick. We don't need to cherry it. Just want to try to open up a gap. Got these fumes coming off from the rust inhibitor that we sprayed on there, or the lubricant. All right, let's try that. I'm switching to a ratchet so I get some more flexibility on the angle. There we go. All right, I guess we will be able to get these off without busting them up. That's the technique that we'll use on all 4. A little bit of heat with the induction heater, and then just a really long breaker bar, 1/2 inch. All right, I'll leave that guy on there till he cools. We'll go do the other 3, and then we'll come back. All right, with those 15 millimeter nuts out of the way, we can turn our attention to this 11 millimeter rusty nut on this downpipe clamp. So here, hopefully the chemical action is sufficient, and it looks like it is. Okay, yep, looks like it's going to work its way off. Might have to go back and forth to cut through all these rust threads. At some point, I can hopefully get this little stubby ratchet in here. Not yet, though. All right, so I'm just going to work this off, and we'll take this guy off, then we'll come back. I'm going to go ahead. There's no reason to show these two 10s over here. There's nothing to that. There's two 10 millimeters here, one on this side and one on the other side for the drain. We'll come back and do the 19 on top. All right, guys, the AC Delco chemical did a great job on the band clamp. So we've got that loosened up. And we're going to bring our attention up here on top. Just get this vacuum line off, hopefully without tearing or breaking it. For the wastegate actuator. And then we're going to pop a fitting like this, 19 millimeter. It's very similar to an oxygen sensor tool. And hopefully we'll be able to crack the torque on this guy. There we go. Well, nope. I'm going to have to get a wrench underneath as well so that the bottom fitting doesn't turn. All right, this fitting is a 16 millimeter. We'll put our 19 adapter back on and see if we can get it off this time. There we go. All right, there's that. All right, so I think the only thing we've got left is we did have one more 10 millimeter for the drain on the other side. I'm going to go get that, and then we should be able to lift this off. All right, after that other 10 on the drain pipe, there's a 10 right here that's holding the CDR valve for the crankcase ventilation. We're going to take that out, and then we're going to pull this guy out of the grommet that's on the valve cover. He just wiggles out like that, just like that. Now to get this to separate down here, at least in our case, to get the turbo to separate from the exhaust manifold, came in down through our opening with a brass punch on this edge. You want to use brass here so you don't dent up any of the steel. And then for some extra persuasion, because this one particular corner was kind of stuck, came in with the brass hammer right on the stud. And the brass won't dent or damage steel because it's softer. That gives you the shock that you need to get it to separate. At this point, right, she's ready to come off. So we're going to work her off this band clamp in the back. We're going to have to fiddle that. It's loose, but we're going to have to fiddle it out of the way with a pry bar. You guys can see right back here, we're clear on the back, but it's kind of cocked and still holding the downpipe in the front here. So I got to get a pry bar in there and get that fitting out of the way, and this guy's coming off. All right, we got that clamp out of the way, I think, and now, unless something else surprises us, we can get this turbo out of here. There we go. All right, so let me find a home for this, and then we'll go after that heat shield. All right, there's only one gasket on this whole shebang. It's up here on the oil drain tube. This is just machined to fit. So what we'll have to do is be very careful cleaning up the corrosion so that we maintain that machine fitment. See if we can get this clamp off out of here because it's putting pressure on this shield that we want to get off. It's like everything is like super cramped on the Suburban. All right, so there's the clamp. The bolt that fell out of it just goes through here. It's made of stainless steel, so it's not rusty, but we're going to need a new nut to go on it for sure. All right, so remember that foot we were talking about. So This guy should like come up off that foot like that on that side. See if we can get this side to let go. Well, that side came off. This side is jammed up. I don't want to bend it, but now I'm seeing why we weren't not able to get it off with the turbo on there. We're having trouble getting it off even with the turbo out of the way. But this is the last step we've got, and then we can get access to these fuel lines. So let me fiddle with this and go back and show you what we ended up doing to get this off of here. All right, guys, we're just trying to get the shield off of this little foot that I showed earlier. Some corrosion, it's holding it on. We gave it some penetrating fluid, and there's a little spot right here on the shelf of the bracket and where it slots into this stainless steel shield. Right, you see we can move it up. So what we're going to try and keep doing is working this back and forth. It's probably going to take a bit, but eventually, I think we're going to be able to get it to let go, and you have to get it to come out evenly. I don't think we can catch it on camera here because we're going to fiddle with it for a little bit longer, but that's the only thing that's holding it on is that little foot. It's kind of like friction fit, and it's just over time, over the decades, it's gotten to where it won't let it go. So let me keep fiddling with that a bit, and we'll bring you back when we get it off. All right, guys, I've been fiddling with this for a while, and I think she's finally going to work out. It's just a really, really tight friction fit on that foot. And there she is. As you can see where I had to really, really work that off, but that little foot that you see right there, that little pointy foot slides up here and into this slot, and it's just a really, really tight fit. There's nothing holding it over here. It's just right there. Now there's another foot on this side right at the very end. So technically, that's technically holding it, but that one I had no trouble with. That slid right out, and that one sits in over here. So that's all that is. We got it out without any damage at all to this guy. And at this point, we can finally see, here's all these injectors, right? There's number 2, there's number 4, there's number 6, and there's number 8, way in the back there. So he's still going to be cramped with these hoses, which at the end of the day, right, they said you needed to remove these hoses, and maybe that's why they said you needed to remove them in the manual, because that's the only way to get number 8. But we'll be able to get to 7 of them and loosen them up, no problem right now. The driver's side, of course, doesn't have any of these kind of obstructions. All right, so at this point, I'm going to PB blast all these 19mm line fittings down, both on the injectors and on the pump. We'll let that sit, we'll grab some lunch, and then we'll come back and work these off. All right, guys, we've let the PB blaster soak in. It's time to go and loosen all of these 19mm fittings at the top of the nozzles. They're coming in to retain the hard lines. I'm going to be using 2 different kinds of tools for this. This first one, when you got a clear shot, is the same one we used on the oil feed line to the turbocharger. All right, so this guy's going to look like I'm just trying to get it to where it's going to fit with the hose line, with the cutout. All right, and we're just going to take a 1/2-inch breaker bar and we're going to break the torque on this guy. That's it. All right, so that's one type rather. All right, so we got the torque broke on that one with that type. The other type we'll use when you got obstructions like this one. So this is the number 2. This number 4 cylinder one will come in with this type of crowfoot type flare end. So this is not a regular crowfoot, right? So it's got more sides on it to not slip. Put something like this on like that. You might have to use a swivel here because this one particular one here, we've got this riser on the exhaust manifold that's in our way. So I'm going to get it on the fitting first. Get on there. All right. And then I want to see what can I use to get on there. Can I get on just from the side? No. So I'm going to have to put a swivel on there to clear this. We should be able to get all of these loosened up between these two tools. All right, now let's just pop the torque on this guy. There we go. All right, so I'm going to go around and do all 8 of these like that. No reason for me to show you all of them. Between these two tools, we'll be able to do all of them on both sides. So I'm going to do the 4 over here and the 4 on the driver's side, and then we'll come back. All right, guys, last one on the driver's side, just to give you a view from this side. We got the number 1 injector we're about to do. Get the tool on here with you guys in the way. That's it. Just break the torque. Remove the tool. A stubby 19 is a good tool for this. For some reason mine disappeared on me, so I'm having to make do with this adjustable wrench. If you come in the camera from the top, right, we're just loosening this fitting up. That's all we're doing. Some of these are kind of rusty and they're on there really tight. So we're going to have to inspect these lines too. That's it. Once you get it to where you can turn it off by hand and it's loose, you're done. All right, so now we've got all these injector lines done. Now let's go to the pump. All right, so now in the pump, same deal. We're going to take the same 2 tools, depending on the line we're working on, and we're going to start cracking the torque on these. Now these shouldn't be anywhere near as tight as the ones on the injectors because they're not exposed to road elements, so they're not going to have corrosion. But try to be gentle on them because if for some reason the pump, if you got your fasteners loose, you could knock it out of time. So what I try to do on this is we zoom out a little bit. You know, I just take the tool. Now because this line here, I might not be able to get this tool in here. Let me switch to a different tool. Naturally, right when I go to show you something, there's a problem. But that's why you have to have a bunch of different tools. Switch this 3/8 breaker bar. Just kind of give it a hit like that. Work it loose that way. Of course, now it's wedged on there. It's not going to give me my tool back. Give me that tool back. Come on, baby. There we go. All right, so we're going to go around, loosen all these up so that we can spin them by hand, just like that. And then we'll come back and we'll take the retainers off and get the lines out of the way. All right, guys, you're not going to be able to get all of the injection pump fittings loosened up till you start getting some of these lines out of the way, but we get a few pairs that we can get out of the way. They're held in and retained by these 7mm bolts that you see right here. So we're just going to take that one off on this 1-3 combination set. And again, these are like the little 7s that were on the heat shield by the turbo. They have a very shallow head on them. So you're going to need a 6-point socket to grab onto them, 7mm. Once that's out of the way, if you got everything loosened up, then this line can finally be freed off. There's going to be some fuel that comes out. We're going to need to get a trim tool to get this clip off of here, and then we can pull these 2 lines out. All All right, guys, as we take these off, we're just going to put a temporary little numbering on them. This is for nozzle cylinder 1, this is for nozzle cylinder 3. Just tape off the ends until we can put some rubber tubing on the ends. I did want to show you here, you don't really have to try and prise this guy off because he might break. It's a lot easier just to come in here with a pry tool or a small screwdriver. Just kind of lift up on it, and that'll open up this harness connector. So this is what we're going to continue doing, is removing each pair that we can to get more access to take the next fitting off so that we can get all of them off the injection pump. All right, just to check in, guys, we've got all the lines off the injection pump. We've got all the lines out where we can inspect and clean them separately. You'll notice I put a little zip tie. You can also put a paint mark on where the number 1 line goes, just to help you with the clocking and the reference and reinstalling the lines when you're done. But at this point, everything's cleared out of the way, and we don't have any more connections that we have to worry about that are going to the injection pump. All right, let's take a look what the service manual says about removing the fuel injection pump. Now, we got it to the point you saw in the previous clip where all the lines are already disconnected, so there might be some duplication here. Nozzle socket, you already saw that. Fuel line wrench, you already saw that as well. This is basically a crow's foot, the 29698B. There's also an A that came out before this, basically the same tool. Let's see, very, very careful. It's electronic. Align the timing marks at TDC prior to removing the pump-driven gear bolts. I'll show you that. They talk about removing the pump-driven gear retaining bolts. This is what we're going to access through the oil filler tube. These are the bolts that they're talking about there. Loosen the fuel injection pump return hose clamps and fuel return hose. Remove the fuel injection pump fuel feed pipe clip at the brackets and remove the fuel injection feed pipe bracket. So we already did this, right? This is just going over what we already did. These are those 7mm bolts that hold those brackets. We already took these 19mm retaining fittings that go onto the nozzles, and we already took the 19mm fittings that go onto the injection pump. So that's already done. This is also already done where they go through the steps to remove the return line hoses and clamps that go in between the nozzles. You actually don't need to do this, by the way. You just need to get the line out of the way. I'm sitting here pondering why they want you to remove the return hoses when you're just doing the... oh, I see why. They're thinking that you're... Okay, so they're going to want you to take that return hard line out. So they're thinking if you're going to take one, you might as well take them all off and replace them. Obviously, if you touch anything, you'd want to do that. We're going to try and get this job done without removing that hard line on the front, and I'll show you how. We'll see how well that goes. Do not bend the fuel injection fuel feed pipes. There's going to be a common theme all through the video because it's all through the service manual. Okay, and we already did this too, where we removed the 19mm ones. You're going to wear safety glasses because it could be under pressure. 30mm wrench may be necessary to hold the nozzle. In our case, we had Russ to do it for us. Again, do not bend the fuel injection fuel feed pipes. That's going to happen over and over and over again. And then cap the fittings on both the nozzle and the injection pump immediately, because everything is subject to being damaged by debris. Just the smallest amount of debris can ruin these type of systems, these mechanical injectors. All right, remove the 3 fuel injection pump mounting nuts. These are going to be on this side here. So here's the front of the engine. If you look on the side where the pump is, you'll see them in the back. I'll show those to you. Loosen the fuel injection fuel pump feed hose clamp and remove the feed hose. It's going to be on the top. I'll show you that. They're reminding you never to rotate the engine with the starter. If you need to move those bolts that you're accessing through that oil filler feed pipe hole, you're going to need to get a breaker bar on the crank pulley and turn that bolt around to move the engine and get those where you need them to go. And then we're going to align the camshaft gear timing marks before we pull this pump out. They're telling you then at that point you can remove the pump and the gasket. There's a gasket right here shaped like a triangle in this diagram right there. Then they're telling you, so I'd say this step is kind of out of whack here. I think what they want to tell you is you're going to loosen the fuel injection nozzle fuel return hose clamp and the fuel injection nozzle hose from the pump, right? Because they already talked about doing it from the side. And then they show over here the exact same picture. But there's actually a feed line and a return line on the pump. You got to disconnect both. I'll show you that when we get there. Along with, they didn't even mention, you got to disconnect the wiring harnesses. And then they're telling you, well, so this step is in the event that you were pulling the nozzles with the pump, right? We're not doing that in this video, but they would tell you to mark those so they go back in the original location. And they're just talking to you about capping the stuff off and storing them where they're, say, clean. Everything is about clean, clean, clean. This is like surgical room clean for this type of job. All right, let's go ahead and get started on removing it. All right, the disassembly continues, folks. We've got to get this positive battery terminal crossover out of the way, so we can use a small baby pry bar to release these clips without damaging them. Just in and up. Just in and up. We can set this guy over here on the AC compressor for now. There's another clip if you got four-wheel drive that's down in here. It's holding this vent tube. If you don't have four-wheel drive, you won't have this one. It's a similar clip. It's on this side, right? And I'm going to come in here and just pop this guy up and let that go. Now, why did I do that? Well, because we're going to have to take this upper fan shroud out. There's 3 10 millimeters here, 2 there, and they're the same orientation as the 2 on this side. So there's one there, and there's one there. So we're just going to pull those out, and then when we get those out, we'll come back and we'll pull it off. All right, with those 7 10 millimeters out, then we can lift this upper fan shroud off. Just fits into a couple of pegs. That'll be the only thing really holding it back, other than the side on these hinge pieces. All right, now with that out of the way, we're almost at the end of the disassembly. So now we got to get this oil filler pipe off. To do that, we're going to have to pull this set of nuts that's holding this bracket on here. Let me get you guys in a better position and bring a light over here, and we'll pull this, and then we'll pull the grommet. All right, guys, we're going to come in here with a 13 deep socket to clear this stud and break the torque on both of these. And then we'll come over here and ratchet them off. There's one. I didn't want to drop it, but this bracket is hitting our socket on this side. Can't get it back on. That's interesting. Not sure why that's happening. All right, let me get a pry bar in here and see if we can make this some clearance. If you zoom in here, you can see just some clearance problem where the flange on the nut is run up against this bracket and we can't take it off. All right, yes, so we just had to get a little bit of flex to it. All right, with both of those nuts off, and this guy just comes out of that rubber grommet down there. Come on. Might have to have a pry bar for this too. There we go. All right, and then we got to get this rubber grommet off. All right, guys, I just grabbed a plastic trim tool to kind of help with working this grommet out. It just has a tendency to kind of want to go back in. There we go. All right, now that's off. That's one thing you want to inspect, make sure it's not cracked. In our case, it's dirty, but it's not cracked, so we can reuse it. And then we pull the flashlight up here. And if you look inside there and zoom in, you can see 2 of the driven gear bolts that we're going to have to pull off. We can't see the third one, but we can see 2 of the 3. So that's what we're going to be after here. All right, before we pull this pump, guys, we're going to need to make a reference to the orientation of the pump's body. So here's this top nut, and the shape of the pump has got like a nice sharp angle here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take that angled flange, and we're going to make a mark right here on the engine block so that we can index this back in. So we got 2 things to index. We got those 3 bolts through the drive gear that we're going to access where we took the oil filler tube off. And then we're going to have to, the body will swivel on its axis, so we got to index it here as well. That'll dial us into the current timing very close. So I'm going to clean this flange up. I'll bring you back and show you what I did, but I'm basically going to use this little spring-loaded punch. I'm going to try to make a couple of dots here that line right up with this corner edge. All right, guys, and if we zoom in here, hopefully the light is going to be good. There we go, right there. So you can see I drew a little line, and then I punched a couple of holes. That's going to index the body. Now let's go pull those bolts. All right, we're going to take these out with a 13 millimeter deep socket. So I have to block your view for a moment. I'm going to come in here and break the torque with a breaker bar. That is on there tight. There we go. And we're going to switch to a ratchet. And a small extension. And then what we want to do to prevent dropping something down here, we're going to take an old toilet roller. And get this to crumple up and fit in here. Because we do not want this bolt falling into the engine. There's nothing you guys are going to be able to see with this kind of setup, but I'm going to work this guy out. Actually, I'm going to have my magnet handy. There's one. Now, how do we get the other two? Well, we get the other two by taking a 15 millimeter socket. If you look down below here, we've got that on one of the bolts it's holding the balancer on. Now, if you come back up and watch inside where we're working, as we turn the engine over, this thing's going to get moved by the timing chain setup. Slowly but surely. Got the fan in my way here. Now you can see that other bolt starting to come into view now. Yeah, drop the tool, but you guys get the idea. We're going to roll this up into position, use the same technique to take this one out, then we're going to roll it again and get the third one out the same way. All right, as we bar the engine over and get to the third bolt, you can see this little pin that's coming from the injection pump coming into view. This is an alignment pin that's going to index the pump to this gear that we're taking these bolts out of. So that's another way that the timing is maintained on this shaft. So you got to make sure when you take the pump off that you get this little dowel pin, and I'll show it to you when we get the pump out, back in that little hole before you put these bolts in. So we're going to just turn it over a little bit more so we can get this third bolt off, and then we'll go on the other side and take the nuts off. All right, now let's start disconnecting harnesses and connections that are going to be tethering our pump. This one looks damaged, so we're going to be careful getting him out. That one, there's one right down here. That one, let's stepper motor. What else do we got? We have a emergency shutoff. Okay. All right, so that should be all the electrical connections going to the pump. Now we're going to go after the fuel line. This is the inlet. This looks like this one's held on by a screw clamp, worm clamp. And then the return, it's just got one of these kind of band type clamps. Wiggle that out of the way. All right, we're going to get a couple of rags, and then we're going to pull those two hoses. All right, we got some rags in position here. Let's break the adhesion on these lines and work it off. Hopefully there's nothing in this return line because we already pulled everything, so that one's off. See if we can get our clamp out of the way here. Work him up here. Let's take a smaller one. A little bit of fuel, just a little bit. All right, almost there, guys. There's nothing left to do but pull the retaining nuts off. Now, to get those nuts off, you have to have a special tool. I'm going to be using this OTC 6087 injection pump wrench set. It's basically some combo S-type wrenches to get at these three nuts that are in really awkward positions. So I'm going to, first, before we pull those nuts, I'm going to get these fuel lines capped off so we don't have any leakage. Get them pulled to the side, and then we'll go after the two nuts on the bottom first, and then we'll do the one on the top last. All right, when you're in front of the pump like this where I am, and you want to get the hose that's on the lower left of this orientation, you're going to use the tool that's shaped like this. Now, if you're using the OTC 314-710, we're going to bring that guy right down onto that nut. And then we have just enough room. You don't have much sway on this, so you got to be patient, but we got it to crack the torque, and now we're just going to have to keep putting it back on and working it off. Now, the one on the lower right of my position, that one's going to be the tool that's shaped like this, the 314-711, if you're using the OTC set. But it's a copy of the Kent Moore and the others. So this tool will bring it in like this, behind the emergency shutoff switch. Get that on this nut over here. Right, and then you got enough sway to get this hose out of the way. You got just enough sway to break the torque on that. There it goes. And then just like this side, you'll have to be patient, right? So you'll work it off, get it back over as far as you can, get it back on, turn it a little bit more, get it off, put it back on, turn a little bit more, just like that. So we're going to do both the bottom ones, and I'll bring you back when we pull off the top and take the pump off. All right, time for the last one. We get this one on top last because it's the easiest one to get to. We're going to use the 314-710 tool and this just gentle sway version. We've already loosened this up to speed things up. It'll get to a point where you can turn it by hand like that. We'll come in here with a magnet. And fish him out. All right, that's the last of the nuts. So with all the nuts out, all the drive gear bolts out, all the harness connections undone, all the fuel lines undone, almost complete disassembly of the engine to get at this guy, we should be able to pull him out now. Okay, we're just going to slide him straight back and then up and out. This harness here is hung up on something. And let me get him out. I'll show you what he looks like. All right, guys. Finally got to this. You see our gasket came out reasonably intact. It's kind of ripped here, but it's all in together. Now you saw me take this pump and pull it straight back towards the firewall. That was not to twist this, to keep it indexed, so we can get that pin lined up for an easy shot putting it back in when we install the replacement. Remember, we've got our number 1 marked here. We'll use that to index on the replacement. Now, if we weren't replacing this, we would have capped off all these hardline connections to the nozzles. But since we're extending this back as a core, we'll just take the covers the core comes with and put them on when we send it back. We don't need to worry about taking too much care with this. When they rebuild it, they'll take the whole thing down and clean everything. All right, so that is it. Now, we got a lot of cleaning in the engine valley. We've got a lot of cleaning on all these things we took off. I'm going to get all that done. I'll show you what we're replacing this with, and then I'll show you reinstalling it. But after that, I'm going to speed through the reassembly and just stop talking about torque values, cleaning tips if they're relevant, and part numbers for gaskets and stuff like that. All right, so what are we replacing that with? Well, we're going to replace it with a GM 1920 9059. These are getting surprisingly, increasingly difficult to locate. Anything that's rebuilt other than by like a specialty shop or just some dealer at some private dealer diesel place, I prefer to pick something up like in this kind of form than something done by a private shop. All right, so what do we got in the box here? Well, we should have a ready to install pump here. All right, so the first thing I was going to show you is, so remember when we took it out, as we turned the engine clockwise, this rotated counterclockwise. And so we talked about needing to get this indexed the same as the old one before we can install it. So that's what we're going to do right here. As close as we can, we're just going to slowly rotate this around. Very slowly. Same as it was when we were barring the engine over and we were watching this come into view. And we just want to get it as close as we can, approximating the original position. And if we go too far, like it looks like I might have went too far, we'll go back around again. We won't rotate it in the opposite direction. We'll just go around again, and we'll get it lined up just like that. Then we'll go put it inside the engine. Okay, so we can take our little paper plug out of this opening. First thing we're going to want to do is put a new gasket on. We're going to use a GM 1013 7486. We're going to put this guy on right here. And we've already cleaned this surface. Make sure that gasket is nice and flush. Let me get up there a little bit more so I can see. Yep. And now we're ready to bring the pump over. We'll slide the pump in. We'll use the top nut to retain it, and then we'll go on the other side and make sure that the little alignment peg is going through the drive gear correctly. All right, guys. I get a good grip on this thing. When you first take them out of the rebuilding bag, they've got diesel fuel on them, so they're a little bit slippery. So we're just going to come down here, get it lined up on the studs. All
All right, I'm just going to sit it like that, and then we're going to come in the front. Got to move the top side creeper out of the way. We'll make sure that alignment pin's lined up.
All right, guys, if we zoom in here, we can see our dowel pin pop through right on the money. So now we're going to go back on the other side, and we're going to tighten down the 3 nuts, and we're going to get the body aligned to the mark we made on the engine block before we come over here and put these bolts in. All right, guys, so the technique for getting these lower bolts in, you see I'm holding it with a magnet, and then all these little serrations on these nuts, I should have said nuts there. You can get a tool like a screwdriver in here, and you can just get it started like this, right? As soon as the threads are started, just by giving the screwdriver a little twist like that, then we can come in with the special wrench and continue it the rest of the way. All right, guys, we're just tightening up the last nut down here. Now, there's a torque value of 30 foot-pounds on these 3 nuts, but obviously because of the need for these special tools, you're not going to be able to get a torque wrench in here. So you just got to do it by your best good and tight feel of that 30 foot-pounds. Now, I'm using this curved end shaped like this to get this guy. You have to work between the 2 tools to get everything tightened down. You can also see that before we tighten these down, hopefully you guys can make it out, we got that corner flange lined up with the dots that we made earlier. This new pump's got some kind of wear or damage to that corner, so it's shaped a little bit differently, but I think it's close enough to do what we want it to do here. So we're going to finish tightening up that bolt, and then we're going to go around the front and put the bolts, that nut, and then we're going to go around the front and put the bolts in to the drive gear. All right, guys, I'm about to put this last drive gear bolt in, just to show you the technique that I use for this. Just going to take a piece of tape to help hold the bolt on the socket, the 13 millimeter socket. Make sure we catch that flange on that washer. I cut our little tool down a little bit, so hopefully it doesn't block you guys' view as much. And then we're going to come in here and I'm going to start it by hand. Now the first 2 are not torqued, because if you torque them up, then you won't be able to get the threads to align and you run the risk of cross-threading. All right, so when it feels like it's starting to get tight, we'll switch to the ratchet. Now in this case, because this is the 3rd one, I'm going to drive it all the way down and then we're going to torque it. And then we're going to have to bar the engine over to get the other 2 and torque them, now that everything's started with the threading. So after this, I'll give you a shot. We've hooked up all the electrical connections, we've hooked up the fuel connections. I'll give you a shot of that, and then we'll take a look in the service manual and we'll see what it has to say. So it's getting tight. When you pull it out, the tape will let go. We can switch to our torque wrench, and we can give 18 foot-pounds on this guy. That was our flashlight taking a dive. Okay, that's it. Now we're going to bar the engine over and torque the other 2. And I'll bring you back and show you where we are. All right, guys, one thing I didn't show you is there's another special tool for rotating the pump. There's a couple of holes cut into the flange, and this tool fits in there. You either use your hand or you can get a 3/8" breaker bar that helps you dial in that timing onto that mark that we made. I should have showed you that when we were tightening up the other bolt, but I'd gotten past it. So that's one thing I wanted to show, and I'll put a link for this kind of tool in the description as well. And then just while we're looking at the old pump, we're getting all the pieces transferred over from the rebuild to put it in and send it back as a core. You can see this was a GM remanufactured pump as well. This one was on this truck installed in 2005, and it made it this far, so almost 20 years. So that's why I kind of stick to the GM reman ones, although this one has been upgraded with the gray Stanadyne type of fuel solenoid driver rather than the old black one or the aftermarket one. All right, let's go take a look at where we're at with the installation. All right, so we already did the 18 foot-pounds on the drive gear bolts. After we put the grommet back in and the oil filler tube, the 2 13mm nuts go to 17 foot-pounds on their torque value. All right, new pump is in. Fuel inlet and fuel return are reconnected. All of our
wiring harness is reconnected. At this point, we're ready to start reinstalling the hard lines back to the injector nozzles. All right, guys, if we zoom in here, we're going to take care of this broken optical sensor harness. We've been swapping the pins out. We're using this Aptiv 1209 4429. Just goes right in there to depin these. And then we can just repin it right in there till it clicks. Pull this guy up into position to hold the lines, and that'll allow us to restore that. And the part number on that connector is an AC Delco PT246 or a GM 1210 1854 for this particular 6-way. So I'm just going to get this guy into position, and then we're going to re-tape him in the back. Just need him to snap on. There we go. Right, and so now we've got a reliable connector. We'll go ahead and put a piece of electrical tape at the end of this wire loom like the factory had to keep it from unwinding, but that repair's done. All right, for the hard lines, the order we took them off was the pair for cylinders 1 and 3, and then the pair for cylinders 2 and 4, and then the pair for 6 and 8, and last 5 and 7. We took them off in this order so that we could get tools in on the injection pump side to fit in and release the torque on those fittings and get them off. You have to clear some of the lines out of the way for a tool to fit. To put them back, we're going to go in the opposite order. We're going to start with the 5-7. We've taken each set and we've cleaned them up. What you want to look at on these, I mean, we're not looking for show car quality here, right? There's going to be corrosion on this mount clamp. That's fine. What you don't want is corrosion on the line itself, because that would indicate that maybe it's going to have some perforation. We've got some surface corrosion on these end fittings. That's fine as well. We don't care about that. But we can go ahead and check all here on all of them to make sure that the actual lines are okay. So with this, we're going to go ahead and blow compressed air through them just in case any debris snuck in there. And then we're going to start reinstalling them in this order. Now this graphic here can be handy for where they go in the pump, noting that you marked where cylinder 1 is. Then you're going to have, for example, we're going to be doing 5 and 7. So we got 5 and 7, right? And then we can keep doing the pairs and have this as a reference for where they go. All right, we've got all the lines reinstalled on the injection pump and torqued down to 20 foot-pounds. Remember the order that you come in here. When you come to do number 2 here, just the way it loops, you'll need to have, number 2 and number 4, you'll need to have 6 and 8 loose in order to get this guy to loop around this piece. That's just probably the only tip I can give you about this. But 20 foot-pounds on all 8. All right, guys, we've got our lines in on the nozzles on the driver's side. Again, 20 foot-pounds on each of the 19 millimeter fittings at the end of the lines. This particular 7 millimeter screw that's holding the bracket for these two, for the 1 and 3, and then you can't see it off camera here, but like right on the edge for 5 and 7. There's no specific torque value in the service manual for this. Just snug it up good and tight. All right, same view on the passenger side, although we've got a lot more visibility. And again, these 7 millimeter retaining screws for these line mount brackets here and here. This is for the 2 and the 4, and this is for the 6 and the 8. There's no torque value, so snug that up with a nut driver, 7 millimeter. And again, the end fittings on the hard lines, just like at the injection pump, at each nozzle, these are also 20 foot-pounds. These 19 millimeters are 20 foot-pounds on all 4 on this side as well. So we're all done with the lines. Now we're ready to put the turbo back in. We've dressed up this fitting here. So there's no gasket on this. It's a machined surface. So you don't use anything abrasive. I used chemical and brass wire to clean this, brass wire brush. That's it. I don't want to take any material off and potentially introduce a leak. On the drain pipe for the turbo oil, we used a carbide scraper, since it's steel, to get off the old gasket material. And we're going to have a new gasket on here. I'll show you that part number in just a minute, but we're going to bring the turbo over here and we'll go over the part numbers for that. All right, guys, we got our heat shield back in. These two 7 millimeters, again, no specified torque value, so just snug them up, make sure they are snug, or you get a rattle here and you'll be pulling everything off to fix it. And don't strip them out because they're very small. The gasket is going to be a GM 1409 8654. This is the gasket that covers the oil drain. We're going to replace the 4 nuts that we had to heat off on the studs with 4 GM 1151 4597. So we're going to put 4 new nuts on these. Our studs were fine, but if you need those, I'll put the part number for the studs in the video description. I also decided to just go ahead and replace this band clamp because not only was the nut rusty, but so was the threads on the screw. 1161 1439 would be the part number for the new band clamp. We're going to get our turbo installed. I'll come back with the torque values. All right, folks, with the turbo back in, let's go over the torque values. We're going to go 43 foot-pounds on those 4 nuts that are 15 millimeters on the studs to the exhaust manifold. And then for the turbo drain pipe, those 2 10 millimeters are going to be 19 foot-pounds. This 19 millimeter oil inlet fitting up on top is 13 foot-pounds. After you get all this in place, you've got this V-clamp on the back. There's no specified torque value. Bring that into position with the same size gap as you originally found it. It's helpful to tap around the edges as you're tightening up that 11 millimeter nut. 11 millimeter stubby is super handy for that. And a 10 millimeter stubby is super handy for this inboard 10 millimeter on the drain. Finally, when you put the air box back in, that 19 millimeter bolt that goes through the fender is 19 foot-pounds. This 10 millimeter bolt that's securing this CDR pipe, no torque value specified, but don't over tighten it. You'll strip out the aluminum on this part of the turbo. Just Guten tight, nice and snug. All right, we're getting ready to install the lower intake manifold. We've got our new gaskets installed. Those are going to be a GM 1253 1704. They got little nubs on the very ends, and you want to make sure you get it oriented so that they're in the correct position in covering the bolts. If I kind of tilt the camera back in the back here a little bit, you can see what I'm talking about. See, this piece in the back has got to go down to cover that bolt hole. Similarly, there's one on the other side. You can easily get it backwards. Make sure you got it in the right orientation. We'll go ahead and get the manifold set in here. Pay particular attention to this return line, right? So there's a tab you got to lift up on the back here. So if I can zoom in and get you a close view of that. Hopefully that's a little better. You got to get this tab here above the manifold and then the one at the front, and that's really the only thing you have to deal with. All right, guys, as we put these bolts back into the lower intake manifold, I mentioned earlier in the video that they're numbered in the order you should torque them, and you're going to torque them in the order they're numbered, the 31 foot-pounds, but 4 of them are special. 9, 11, 13, and 15 penetrate into the crankcase, and they're going to have to be sealed, just like a water pump bolt going into the water jacket. I'm going to be using this GM product here, 1234 6004. To do that, we're just going to take the lower portion, this particular one I'm almost out of here. We're just going to spread it on the threads, just like a water pump bolt. Just want to make sure we see it on all the threads. You don't need to goober it up. You just need to make sure you cover all the grooves. And now we're ready to install these 4 that are special, and then we can go torque them in the order they're specified. All right, just a little bit more progress. All these 15 millimeter nuts on all the brackets go to 31 foot-pounds also. Same on the ones that are securing the battery grounds and the grounds over here on the back firewall side of the passenger side. These clamps that hold the air box on here and here, this is 45 inch-pounds. This one doesn't specify, but I would run it about the same or snug. You don't want to over-tighten the plastic. 15 inch-pounds on the smaller clamps that go to this little accordion elbow here. When we get ready to put the upper intake manifold on, these 6 10 millimeters are going to go to 17 foot-pounds. Don't forget to re-RTV your seal here before you install that piece. You're going to need a new gasket if you have an EGR type, If you have a turbo type, it depends on the condition. This is the part number for the turbo type, 1013-7537. We're going to go ahead and put a new one on here because the other one's been there for quite some time. And then I'll go ahead and RTV this up. And the last torque value I'll give you is for this band clamp here. And we'll go ahead and hook the battery back up and get ready to start it. All right, guys, this is actually 50 inch-pounds. I missed it in the manual the first time. So 45 inch-pounds here, 50 inch-pounds on the one where the ducting goes to the turbo, and then also 50 inch-pounds on the band clamp after you put the RTV sealant on here. This brace here, these two 13s are 19 foot-pounds. This longer brace that you can't really see that goes to the turbo down to one of the intake manifold bolts, up here at the top, this bolt here is a 15 millimeter. It's 37 foot-pounds. And then, interestingly, the 15 millimeter nut on the end is 30 foot-pounds instead of 31 like all the others. But, you know, what's 1 foot-pound in the grand scheme of things? At this point, we've got everything done here. We're going to get ready to let the thread locker and the Teflon sealer on the bolts set up before we try to start it. We're going to let that sit for about an hour. We're going to go ahead and hook the battery back up, but other than that, we're ready to go. We're going to leave the cover off because we may have to adjust the timing one way or the other when we get to the final step after we start it, and we're going to use a Tech 2 scan tool for that. And the only other thing I'll show you is the material that I use to seal this hose here is this guy here from Permatex, black adhesive sealant silicone RTV. There's really not a GM product that's made anymore for that, and this works great. All right, guys, you're going to want to put a new fuel filter in as well. I'm going to use an AC Delco TP1256 or GM 1015-4635. We've already put it in the fuel filter manager, and we're going to bleed the air out. This will also help bleed some of the air out for this outlet pipes that are coming from the fuel filter manager over into the injection pump. After you do that, and I'll link a video up here on the right that goes into this fuel filter change in more detail. I didn't want to spend any more time in this clip on it. You're going to make sure the batteries are fully charged because you're going to have to do a long crank to purge the air out of these lines. You might want to try cracking the hard lines at some of the different injectors, the 19 millimeter fittings that are down below. I don't know if we can see them in this view. Pretty obstructed though, but you know what I'm talking about, and that will help you get that air out of the pump and out of the lines faster so you can get a start. All right, we're in the final stretch here. So now, injection timing adjustment. There's two things. There's a top dead center offset adjustment, and then there's an injection timing adjustment. When you replace the pump, you do the injection timing adjustment. The method of adjusting the timing is the same, but the procedure is different in the scan tool. So basically, you guys can read on your own here, but the gist of this is we're going to get the engine up to operating temperature. We're going to run it up to around 185 degrees Fahrenheit. We're going to put our Tech 2 on there because this has to be done with a scan tool. We're going to use the scan tool to activate the time set function. If you got it correctly activated, desired injection time on the scan tool will read 0.0 degrees. They make a note here that the actual injection time value on the scan tool will fluctuate. What you want to be looking for is that the average reading is 3.5 degrees. The actual injection time, which the scan tool is displaying, should be approximately 3.5 degrees. If not, continue to step 6. So hopefully we're okay with those steps we took earlier in the video. If we're not, we have to go back under the hood, loosen those 3 15 millimeter nuts with the special tools on the pump, and we have to rock it one way or the other to get it into this approximate timing. What they mentioned to you is about rotating the tool. I'm looking for which way you move it. Yeah, so if the actual time is above 3.5 degrees, slightly, remember 1 millimeter equals 2 degrees, slightly rotate the pump towards the passenger side. If the actual injection time is below 3.5, slightly rotate it to the driver's side. So that's the offset. So you would then make a slight 1 millimeter adjustment based on what you're getting on the scan tool, tighten everything back down, go back in, get it back up to temp, and repeat this procedure. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll show you where this is at in the scan tool, and then we'll have to wait for it to get up to temp to actually do it. All right, let's build out the vehicle using a Tech 2 scan tool. 99 truck. We're going to go into powertrain. We're going to pick a 6.5 liter, and this one is a VIN code F L65 RPO. It's a four-wheel drive, so it's a K, and it has a 480E. And then we're going to go into special functions. I think it's in fuel system. Nope. Injection pump, time set. All right, so when we get to the right temperature, we're going to go into this time set, but we're not going to go into this until we get to the right temperature. So until the temperature's there, we're going to monitor the data. Engine data display. And what we're going to be monitoring is the engine coolant temperature. So right now we're at 109 degrees Fahrenheit. It's pretty warm outside. We ran for 5 minutes to check for leaks as an initial startup that we showed earlier. And we actually did have one small leak on the number 3 return line, but we were able to adjust it with a clamp movement, so that turned out not to be a big deal. So we're going to wait for this guy on ECT to get up to 185 degrees, and then we're going to go into the time set function. All right, 183, that's close enough. Let's back out, and let's go into the special functions, engine output controls, injection pump time set. So it's currently reading 11.1, but we haven't activated. So we have to turn this on per the information in the service manual. So let's go ahead and do that, and maybe it learns the new timing, or maybe we have to go adjust it. All right, so it learns the new timing, but we need an average of 3.5, and we're hovering around 5, so it's too much. So just like the service manual said, we're going to have to go in and adjust it to, we're going to have to physically move the pump and adjust this 1 millimeter, come back and see if we get closer to seeing that actual injection pump timing floating around 3.5. What we want to see is like 3.5, 3.6. We don't want to see this 4.6, 50, 52 kind of thing. So it's just slightly off. So just go ahead and we'll turn this off, and then we'll go make that adjustment, and then we'll do it again. All right, to redo the time set, we've once again had to relieve tension on the AC compressor so that we can get some visibility down to one of these nuts, and we've had to disconnect the return line from the top of the pump. But that's it as far as further disassembly. We've got our adjusting tool on the mount there. We've used our special tools to loosen the 3 bolts, loosen the 2 on the bottom first, and then the one on the top last, and then you can use the tool to dial it in. We've tried to move it very slow and very small amount, maybe a 1/16 of an inch, towards the passenger side, since we had more than 3.5 degrees on the time set. So we're going to go tighten those nuts back up, reconnect these items, and give it another shot. All right, we let it get a little hotter than we needed to here, but that's okay. Let's go back and see if the adjustment we did got us where we needed to be. All right, we're going to enable the time set function now. 3.8, 4.1. I hate this, guys. It's such a pisser to adjust this, but we still need to adjust it just a hair, right? We want to see this number floating around 3.5 to 3.6, not 3.6 to 4.3. It's really close, but it's not close enough. So I'm going to go ahead and do what I showed you earlier. I'm going to see if I can move it another 1/16 of an inch or so. It's, it's a very small amount that we need, otherwise we'll go too far in the other direction. But again, we'll move it just a very small amount to the passenger side, loosen up the 2 bolts in the bottom, get our tool in position, loosen the one on the top, and just a very small amount to the passenger side, and we'll recheck it one more time. All right, guys, 181, it's close enough for me. Let's go in and see if we finally got this dialed in for the umpteenth time. Special functions, engine output controls, injection pump time set. Let this guy populate. All right, so we're going to come down the button underneath the on button. We're going to turn it on and activate it so it records the time, and there we go. That's probably as close as we're going to get it, right? I'm seeing 3.5, 3.4, 3.6. That is close enough for me, guys. It's really, really finicky, and it's a very, very fine adjustment. So this is probably as close as we're going to get it with a 26-year-old timing chain.
Let me go give you an idea about just how small the increments are to do this adjustment. By the way, before I leave, once you hit the button down here to turn it on, it sets the time in the powertrain control module. There's nothing else you need to do. It's done. So at this point, we've completed the time. All right, guys, we're looking at a ruler in 30 seconds. If we zoom in here, right, you can see how small these notches are, or these marks. That's the increment that you want to be moving this pump. Let me go show you a mark right on the pump itself that I made right before getting this dialed in. So guys, let me give you a view of just how small I mean when I say small in terms of movement here, so we can get this guy to focus right there. So that's a little mark I made with that Sharpie I showed you, and that's all the distance I moved it for this last adjustment that finally dialed it in. So you can see it's about a 32nd of an inch. Very small. All right, some of you may be wondering, why did I leave the PMD in the stock position? If we go down here and we get the light just right, I can show you. You see that little dab of epoxy right there? So these GM AC Delco units, and I would suspect as well as the ones from Alliant Power and some of the Stanadyne dealers that are still rebuilding them, they only warranty these pumps if you leave the PMD in the stock position. Now, the GM ones have these little dabs of epoxy all the way around so they can tell if you've pulled it off and remote mounted it and it voids your warranty. So I'll show you how you can get around this and still keep the warranty. I'll put a little video up here in the upper right on how you can remote mount this guy and still keep it. Timing is verified. We can put the engine cover back on. These 410s go to 100 inch-pounds. And you're done. This is a long, epic video with a lot of detail. I hope you found it useful in doing your engine repair and getting your new injection pump installed on your 6.5 liter diesel. I'll link the parts that we went over in the description along with any special tools, and the video title will cover the years that this particular procedure applies to. If you got any questions or comments, leave them below and I'll try to help. If you found this video saved you some money, you learned something, pay it forward and hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching.